Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Tsoukalis recapping a rough watch from Alabama basketball. The Tide losing 74-64 to Ole Miss. Tony and I are going to give kind of our step back take, if you will. You know, we're a couple days removed from the game, had a chance to digest what went wrong for Alabama in their first loss in SEC play. First home loss of the season, losing at Coleman Coliseum on blue collar night of all things. I can't believe the Tide managed to spoil blue collar night. That I know Nate Oats mentioned after the game, but yeah, Alabama falling to one of the only other two undefeated teams, and now there is just two in Ole Miss, to drop to 3-1 in conference play. And Tony, we're going to start immediately, I think, with Nate Oats's comments after and just get your kind of interpretation, our interpretation and all that. The headline to me after his post-game press conference, he called the loss disgusting. Said it, I think, a few times. Just a couple of quote snippets. He said, "I told the whole team, you've got to earn the right to play well. Are you spending enough time in the gym working on your game outside of practice? Are we having to beg you to get to the gym?" He said he's going to have a good talk with some of the seniors that are supposed to be leaders and figure out why they weren't ready to go. And then said, "We didn't lose because they were a far superior team. I felt like we lost because they came ready to play. They brought energy, they brought effort, and we did not. It was that's a frustrating way to lose." Some pretty concerning stuff from Nate Oats. I know it's his kind of immediate reaction after the game, and it was a 10-point loss to a ranked and good Ole Miss team. I think they do deserve a lot of credit. But Tony, what do you make of those comments, and how worrisome is that for you, with this Alabama team fresh off a big win over A&M to come kind of lay an egg like this?
I think it's, and this is what I was worried about when I made my 14-4 prediction. And I just had an optimistic, it should be a wake up call. Ole Miss is not a far superior team. That's correct. Right. They're also a good team, and there's plenty of good teams in the SEC that don't get put in that elite status that can beat you. And I think Ole Miss is just one of those. I think Missouri is one of those. You saw the same thing with Florida. And if you don't come 100% in the SEC, you're going to get beaten, whether you're at home, whether you're on the road. And this is just a wake up call. This is, I think a lot of people went into this game thinking that it was going to be similar to Oklahoma, where this team came in, they hadn't played anybody, and Alabama was just going to, have their way with them. And Ole Miss isn't Oklahoma, and most of the SEC teams aren't Oklahoma, and so I think it's just a thing. Like, if Alabama doesn't fix these problems, obviously Kentucky on the weekend is going to be difficult. Everyone knows that, but other games too are going to be tough. Georgia's a good team. Like I said, Missouri is a good team. There's teams that are going to sneak up on you that aren't necessarily on your radar. Ole Miss was one of them for Alabama, and they've just got to. It should be a wake up call. This is basketball. It's not football, so you don't have to panic with one loss. But it is concerning that it's a home loss, and Alabama looked horrible in it. I mean, they really did. It was blue collar night, and it couldn't have been a worse night for it to be blue collar night. I mean, they just came asleep. They didn't do any of the hustle plays that Nate Oats' program is built on. And I think from what you said at the start, it was a rough watch. I mean, it was just I think some people were getting onto. I saw on social media that the crowd wasn't into the game. Like, when could they have been into the game? Like, there was a couple moments where they were like almost allowed to be into the game, and then Alabama would instantly throw those away. So. It was a rough one to watch. It was a rough one to cover. I think you almost have to remember how it felt from Alabama, but flush a lot of it, because that wasn't the Alabama we've seen.
Yeah, and I think the Alabama that we have seen at times has been this team where it's sort of fallen asleep in moments. And, Nate Oats has talked about that, having some of these big leads in games and letting it slip, even against Texas A&M, being up double digits with around 7 minutes to go. And then they're able to kind of come back. And again, that's a good Aggies team. And to your point, teams are going to do that in the SEC. You can erase runs like that if you don't, stay on top of the game. But the fact that it happened in this way, where it was instantly, I mean, I believe it was 7 turnovers in the first 10 possessions, from the starters. Then the second half, they came back out again and committed 2 quick turnovers. I think Nate Oats, I think I wrote it down. It was less than a minute and a half the group was on the floor before he made a sub. I think it was Grant Nelson both times that came out of the game too, and he had a rough night with 5 turnovers. But the fact that it sort of all hit at once, where none of the offensive stuff was going right, but then the effort just wasn't there. And Oates talked about it. There is not really an excuse from a lack of leadership or accountability standpoint. There are 5 fifth-year seniors on this team, and he took. I was curious your thoughts on that too, in terms of how much ownership he took in terms of getting his guys prepared. I harken back to the Purdue game. He said the same thing when Trey Kaufman-Renn went off for 26 points against them. Said I didn't do a good job getting his guys prepared. That was November, but we're seeing it in January now. I mean, what's kind of maybe your interpretation of that? But I do agree with you overall as well that I think most of this game should be flushed, but you should remember the feeling of it.
Yeah, once again, I think it's basketball, and you're playing so many games that occasionally you're gonna have a bad night. The thing about it is, you can have a bad night, you can have a night when things just don't go well, but you should always be able to control your effort. And so that's the biggest takeaway from it. Is it'd be one thing if Alabama just didn't have it. They missed 20 free throws, or just couldn't hit from 3, or but actually, when you look at this game, I mean, look, Alabama, they shot 43%, which is fine. The free throws actually weren't even an issue. I mean, I mentioned it. The clutch free throws were bad. You lost some momentum with those back-to-back misses from Grant Nelson after the technical in the second half. But 73% is not as bad as what it has been for Alabama. But like the turnovers, the just lack of offensive boards, those are things that should be effort plays. Just the lack of blue collar points. I mean, you shouldn't lose that bad on those. And you're going to play. I mean, I'm not even saying that you shouldn't lose your blue collar. Like, Alabama's going to have games where they lose the blue collar points. Ole Miss is a blue collar team. I mean, they are a pesky bunch. That's what they do. They're one of the better defensive teams. They do everything the right way. They don't turn the ball over. They get turnovers. They're scrappy. They're not big, but they're I mean, we saw Malik Dia. I mean, like, he plays 7 foot. And he was fun to watch. That was probably the most fun thing to watch. But you're not going to win those every night. But you can't get dominated the way Alabama was, especially at home. I mean, just on effort. You can lose games, but you can't get dominated that bad just on things you can control.
Yeah, I think if this is the final score line of the game and Alabama's still hustling for offensive boards, like you said, forces a few more turnovers, but it's, hey, this Ole Miss team went out and proved a point, which I think to an extent they still did. But if I think Oates was more frustrated, like you said, not as much that they were flat out beaten by Ole Miss, but that a lot of it was Alabama, beating itself in a lot of regards. And then Ole Miss, a good team, a good defensive team, is going to take advantage of those moments. And that's, this is the result. But I want to dissect a little bit of that further, on the stats wire. Yeah, you got another thing.
Yeah, I've got one thing to say too. You talk about people that were hustling at the end and doing things. And if you want to draw a silver lining from this, I thought Jarin Stevenson, I'm the biggest Jarin Stevenson, I guess, hater. I'm very critical of his
naysayer.
Yeah, I am a big naysayer when it comes to him. He played great down the stretch. I mean, he was there keeping Alabama in the game. He hit a big 3. I think he had 2 blocks in the last 2 minutes. I mean, he was just pesky. If they all played like Jarin Stevenson played at the end, Alabama would have won this game. I mean, he was good. And so, he's a guy that needs to kind of he's been there defensively. He's won back-to-back hard hat awards. So it shouldn't be that much of a surprise, but you start, you go into that mantra with Nate Oats and, those defensive effort that they lead to things on the offensive side of the ball. I think we kind of maybe saw a little bit of that upward trajectory. I don't know if I'm like I said, I'm a little bit of a hater. I'm a little bit of a doubter. But I wouldn't be totally shocked if Jarin Stevenson has a big game against Kentucky, just because I don't know, there's a momentum swing to be taken from the way he played at the end of that game. And maybe he can ride that. And boy, would that be a great boost for Alabama if he just came out and was just as good on both sides of the ball against Kentucky. But that's just the silver lining I would take from the game, was just his play.
Yeah, I have a couple other silver linings too, which we'll get into. But I totally agree. He has found a nice I think, role to start SEC play. And I agree. I thought he was good. There was the sequence where he had a turnover with like 5:30 in the game, and 2 possessions later, he's hitting a three. Next possession gets a block, kept his head up. Nate Oats talked about that midweek before on Monday before the game, just about him and having a conversation with him to keep his confidence up. Hey, don't worry about pleasing the coaches all the time. Keep your head down and try and make a play. And that's what he was doing.
I felt like nobody wanted to take a three in that game. I think that was a big problem too. I think he lost some confidence. I mean, like, it just seemed like nobody was confident. Nobody wanted to like step up and be that guy. So, like you said at the end when he came in and took that three, I thought that was big too, just from a guy that hasn't been sinking them. Just probably stepped up and said, "Hey, look, let me try to take the team on my back." So
yeah. I think there were 3-point attempts he had, and it was the one make, and then the next possession he attempted another one from like the same spot. Of course, with his luck and fortune with that shot, he missed it. But yeah,
I mean,
you're
like,
right.
yeah, on a night where like you needed to make threes, and people just I felt I'd have to go back and really watch it again to confirm this theory, but it felt like on top of the turnover, it felt like Alabama was just scared to shoot threes. I think like they were in their own head a little bit, and I just nobody really wanted to be that guy.
Yeah, I credit to Ole Miss there too. I mean, Nate Oats kind of talked about it. They hadn't faced a team like that switched both on and off ball with chasing around defenders, and did kind of call out his guards a little bit for not attacking those switches better. And so, yeah, a lot went wrong there. So, I mean, Ole Miss deserves a lot of credit, but I think you're right. I think it's you have to be better at shot hunting if you're Alabama, and that goes into some of the offensive struggles that got exposed in general. I mentioned the turnovers, 21. It was a season high. 64 points in the game was a season low. And then the big thing, of course, that Nate Oats talked about, and you mentioned it, Tony, the lack of offensive boards. Alabama had just 4 in this game. They were also, I think, more impactfully, I mean, they were outshot. I think Ole Miss it was 70 something to I think 47 total field goal attempts.
I mean, yeah, some of that's just because it was 70-47. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get outshot on your home floor, only 4 offensive rebounds. This is a team that has been one of the best in the country at grabbing O boards. And Nate Oats said flat out that has saved this team's offense so far this year was its effort on the offensive glass to create some of those second chance points. I think back to A&M, you had the possession 3 straight Mark Sears threes, and he misses 2 of them. You get the offensive board a third time. He's not going to miss 3 in a row. He hits that 3. Those were not happening. And, with all the other offensive struggles, Oates was kind of asked about just the trends. And he said, I think we should all be pretty concerned. We're not aggressive other than on the rebounds. The guards didn't come off attacking the switch, like I just mentioned, like we tried to coach them to do. And they're obviously not shooting the ball well at all either from 3 and didn't take a lot of attempts. How worried does that make you in terms of, Oates kind of gave sort of a one-dimensional feel of this offense, sort of needing offensive boards. And obviously he wants that to continue, but some kind of worrying trends that against a decent team that will sneak up on you in the SEC.
Well, here's another thing too. Like the shot disparity looks really bad, but there's also a turnover disparity. So when you're negative 14 in turnovers, let's just take away those 4. Like I'm not saying like take away all of the turnovers, but let's make them even, right? So Ole Miss had 7 turnovers, and Alabama had 21. So it's like give Alabama 14 more shots, and they're at 61-70. You're still getting outshot, but it's a lot of it was turnovers. They just weren't getting shots on possessions that they gave the ball away. But yeah, it's not just that. I think that I think a lot of people, like you said, were asleep. I think you also had some of the youth was exposed. I think you had LeBaron Philon just had a rough game, an awful game, and he looked kind of timid at times as well. I think it's kind of. I wonder if the back-to-back freshman of the week honors kind of got into his head, and then he was hit with a bad performance or less than performance against Texas A&M, and then hit again. And now I wonder if as a freshman, you can get in your head like that. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's a little bit of it. If that's the case, I think that's fixable. You've had back-to-back, like just if I remember right, I have to go back and look at the Texas A&M stats. It's all blurred now, but like Grant Nelson's kind of went from doing really, really well. I think he was like number 2 in your rankings, and then He's been down the last couple games.
His shot has failed him. His shot has kind of left him
I think
recently.
a lot of it is slumps. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of that's probably mental as well. But I don't know how concerned I am. I think a lot of this is fixable on the offense. I don't think this is a completely flawed team just because of how we talked about, I just read a column about how versatile Alabama was. And it's like, I feel like I gave them the kiss of death, calling them the SEC title favorites, and then they lose at home. But they are still versatile. They can still go inside. They can still hit threes. So I'm not ready to just totally hit the panic button after one game. But I just think a lot of this is fixable. I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning, where if you're not on your A game in this conference, you're going to lose.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the versatility piece is interesting to me. And I will add on to what you said, where Nate Oats did say in that same quote, he also thought it was fixable. He talked kind of about the coaching staff. Maybe the players flush a lot of the things from this game away, but the coaching staff's certainly going to look at kind of what went wrong offensively, try and fix a lot of those things. I think they're going to get back to being good on the offensive glass. I think this was more of a blip and not a sign of something worse to come. But I'm curious with that versatility part. This is something I've been thinking about, and I want to go back and watch it as well. This is 2 games now where on both sides of the court, Nate has kind of talked about these sort of front court struggles, and it seems like to an extent, when guys aren't clicking, he's kind of tinkering a little bit with solutions. He talked about not playing Clifford Amore enough. I know he was dealing with kind of that. He twisted his ankle against A&M, so maybe there was some nervousness injury wise there. But you mentioned
I don't
those
think
two.
Clifford Amore looked good. When he said that, I was a little bit surprised. Like he didn't. I didn't think he looked his dominant self on both sides of the ball. So I kind of got playing, Clifford less, just because he didn't look like he was really at his top level.
I think my big thing, and this I guess is more of a defensive side of the ball take than on the offensive side. We watched this Alabama team kind of bully a 6'8", 250-pound big out of a game in Colin Murray Boyles on South Carolina, who's a projected lottery pick in the NBA draft. And the guy who did it and got all the credit for it after was Mohamed Diabate. I would have liked to have seen more of him on Malik Dia one-on-one. I thought that was a little strange. He did play 13 minutes, played 19 against South Carolina, but I didn't really see the same chance for him to make an impact defensively. I would have liked to have seen that more.
I like that too, especially against if you think about it, if you want a more athletic, it's where size doesn't matter. Dia's what, 6'9"?
6'9".
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like you're putting Mo on a 7-footer where he's gonna have that big height advantage. Yeah, I think that's probably a really good point. He's the guy that maybe you put in, maybe even at that small 5. Like that's the we've talked about, how versatile Alabama is, and like how you could even put Mo Diabate as a small 5. This was the game you could have done that more. And then maybe put, like Mo, Stevenson, and then 3 guards, and just really kind of go small. Yeah, I think I would have liked to see that more. I didn't agree with Nate Oats. I mean, he knows more ball than I do, but I didn't agree that it was Amore that was necessarily the answer in this game. And I'm not saying Clifford Amore is a bad player that shouldn't play. Just in this game, I didn't see it. If anything, I mean, you only played, if you're going to go that route, I didn't really see it from Cliff. Maybe play Cheryl more than 4 minutes. He had 4 points in 4 minutes, and I think he had a couple boards.
It was a productive 4 minutes. He looked good. I was actually impressed with his
one board. But it's really hard to tell. Like I said, he was 2 of 2. It's hard to tell in 4 minutes, right? But yeah, I mean, like if you're maybe try him out a little bit more, but I think really Mo Diabate would have been maybe more the answer. Kind of living in hindsight there, though.
I think the thing he said about Cliff, to me, it just felt like he sort of didn't really decide what he wanted to do with the front court piece, whether it was play Cliff more, whether it was play Mo Diabate or Aden Sherelle more. And then it sort of led to this, everyone was kind of struggling, and then no one really had a chance to kind of get a foothold in the game because he was rotating so much, and it just sort of culminated in another 6'8". You watch Trey Kaufman-Renn do it. He's the same build as Dia too, and he's another sort of bigger wing that they're using as a small ball 5-man, kind of dominate them.
Is Nate Oats still getting used to having bigs? Like, because this is not the first time. Remember, I forget what it was, because I remember asking him about Aden
Mhm.
Sherrill earlier this season, and him kind of saying the same thing of like, I should have played him more. I wish he would have came up and said something. I wonder if Nate just you go from a team that you really didn't have it. Not to say that he's never dealt with a big, before. He's had bigs on his teams before, but I wonder if like he's kind of like getting used to how to use, especially with Cliff, who he's managed with minutes, and then you've got Aden Sherrill, who's like young, and you've got to kind of ride whether or not he's there in games, whether he's ready for a certain matchup. But
Yep.
I wonder if that's been a challenge for Nate in terms of just knowing how to manage his bigs. And if that's the case, he's going to have to figure that out, by the time things really ramp up in March, because I think that's going to be big. The usage of bigs, obviously, in the tournament and in the SEC tournament and everything like that, is going to be big. So I think that's part of it too. And Nate said it's on the coaches too. That I think that's probably far down on the list of problems, but his usage of bigs, I think, is something to at least monitor.
Well, and I think that goes into, it's one thing when you're defending a traditional 7-footer and you know what you're getting, but if you're not really sure what you're doing with your big man rotation, it makes sense that these kind of 6'8" tweeners are the ones who are hurting you. And so that I think plays into that a little bit. But yeah, man, Malik Dia, credit to him. He was a fun watch. I enjoy. I'm looking forward to watching him the rest of the way too on the Ole Miss side. He's a good player. He's a good player. He's crafty, and like
I
you
mean,
said,
he's
plays bigger
the
than he
way he
is.
could move, and I like big bigs. Like I like
Traditional bigs.
Yeah, I just like the big. Who's the guy that? Oh my gosh, why is his name blanking me, from Arizona? That
Oh,
Alabama.
Omar Ballo. He's on
Omar
Indiana
Ballo.
now.
Yeah, I like wanted him at Alabama. I think Cliff's a better fit, but like I wanted that. I like chunky bigs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like why I like Aden Sherrill's got some size to him. And
So you were a Bediako fan then?
yes, yeah, I like your just I like the guys that you could just muscle down there.
Right.
And that and to Malik Diaz's credit, he moved so well, and he pulled up from three a couple times.
He's fluid.
Did he hit a three against Alabama? I think he went over. He was 0 for 3, but like, let me pull up his stats. I remember looking at that. He's not invisible from beyond the arc.
He's got
I mean,
some.
like 26%. But hold on, though. He's shooting 26.8% this year, but last year for Belmont, he shot 34.1. And the year before for Vanderbilt, he shot 35.3. So he's a guy that's not invisible from three. I like his game. I like him a lot. He's going to cause problems for somebody else. This is not just an Alabama thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Actually, I mean, if you look at him in SEC play, he's really, it's kind of crazy. I just pulled up his numbers now. His first 20-point game was against Arkansas, 21. Then he had 19 against LSU and 23 against Alabama. And then the assists are 8, 7, and 19. He's coming on. I mean, shoot, dude. Since the start of SEC play, he's an SEC Player of the Year candidate. I mean, that's a. I guess I missed Georgia where he went 7-7, but even 7-7 for a bad game is not terrible, I guess.
The all SEC case for Malik Dia. Yeah, he's
possible sleeper candidate. I mean, shoot, I'll tell you what, he'll be in the conversation if he does this every week.
he is a fun player. Credit where credit is due for Malik Dia, and just the way Ole Miss uses him and operates that team. They do deserve a lot of credit for the win. But it will be interesting now how Alabama responds. And you mentioned Jarin Stevenson. I think we should talk about some good in this game because it was a 10-point loss in the end. I fear not, Alabama fans. I don't know. I know there was some
10-point loss though.
What?
It was a 10-point loss.
Right. It was still a 10-point loss, but it wasn't the worst loss in the Nate Oats era, as I've seen plastered in some places. I think there are a couple of things to take away here. I was fairly impressed, at least in the first half. I think it's one of those things that when your effort's not there, your defense is going to go away. I was still pretty impressed overall by the defense in the first half. Alabama, despite how it started, that was one of the worst starts I've maybe seen in a long time from a starting lineup. And his defense kept him in the game. Alabama was winning this at halftime. Ole Miss was at a 0.85 points per possession. I thought that was pretty good. Again, overall it becomes a moot point. They lost the game by 10 and it kind of fell off in the second half. But this defense under Brian Adams, Tony, has to me improved pretty dramatically from last season. I've been impressed as a whole. Obviously, Ole Miss, is a game you might want to flush, but I don't know. I don't think we've had too many conversations about this defense in general, but I think it's really turned up this year.
I definitely think so. That is a silver lining to look at. I think we were talking before if Alabama came with last year's defense in this game with the effort that they had, it could have gotten a lot worse. Um, it's a different team, and it's got a lot more talented defenders on it. And there's even players too. I mean, they were playing without Darian Reed. I like him on defense as well. Actually, I mean, I don't think we're gonna see Houston Millette, but another guy that can play defense.
I was thinking last night that was a game they felt like that could have used Houston Millette. Just kind of an injection of energy. Oates talks about how hard he plays on both ends.
Too, yeah.
3-point shooting. Yeah, I feel like they could have used him.
Yeah. But no, I think it does have a defense, and I think it's gonna get better. I think Chris Youngblood is a player too. Nobody really played well, but I thought he looked decent at times in that game.
He's another guy that just hustles, even when his shot's not falling.
Yeah. He's a guy that I think you could maybe argue put him in the starting lineup. I think that's one of the things we're probably going to talk about. But I think maybe if you have LeBaron Philon struggling, maybe you put Chris Youngblood in the lineup. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wrote about this in the triple double column on the site. I wonder, just given Oates sent a really strong message after this game. In terms of effort and in terms of guys, his whole thing was you have to earn the right to win. And if guys aren't doing that, and he was asked about LeBaron Philon and said flat out his blue collar stuff has been better in weeks prior to these last kind of couple games. And if you're going to kind of put some actions with your words here, I wonder if you do make a swap there, or even like you said, he used Mark Sears, LeBaron Philon, and Chris Youngblood in that 3-guard lineup that we know he's a fan of. I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate trying it for a game. I don't know if Kentucky's necessarily that game, but maybe in terms of sending a message, I definitely don't mind it. And Youngblood, to me, yes, is a guy that he didn't have the best offensive game against Ole Miss, but his effort since he's come back and his offensive output against A&M, I think has probably earned him the chance to start. I've got another guy there too that we'll get into, but that's my take on that.
Yeah, well, I think your other guy is probably Aden Holloway, right?
Yep.
Look, not to go off script here, but do you like him, and do you risk maybe putting ruining the flow, like his little run by making him a starter? Like, is he one of the guys that is he benefiting from coming off the bench? I mean, we saw that with Javon Quinterly, right? Like a guy that was just like better coming off the bench. Maybe you didn't see it with Javon Quinterly because you came in.
Oh, I watched. I was
but Javon Quinterly is like probably a better player coming off the bench. I think that maybe Aden's the guy that you keep on the bench as that sixth man, and then Chris Youngblood, a guy that was the player of the year for his team. Kind of used to being the starter, the star guy. Maybe you put him in the starting lineup, and then you have that injection of pace with Aden Holloway too, especially because I think it kind of like throws a different a surprise punch. Just if you get used to guarding Alabama a certain way, and then you put Aden in, how smooth and he's got to get that mid range game going on. I think that's a kind of like a nice little curveball to throw when you got a bunch of fastballs at the beginning of the game. So I kind of like a Sears, Youngblood. I can't believe I'm saying this. Stevenson, Nelson, and Amori starting lineup against Kentucky.
You send a bit of a message to Philon.
Yeah, the other thing too that if we're just gonna talk about starting lineups, I don't like. I talked about this the other day, and maybe this is a non-ball knower. I'm primarily football. Why is it always Alabama has to match the opponent? Why can't you go against a Kentucky
I was wondering when you were going to bring this up. Yeah.
Why can't you go against a Kentucky team and say okay, like what I don't want to see is like, okay, this Kentucky team doesn't really play defense, but they can shoot. So, we've got to put Aden Holloway, Mark Sears,
Four
and
guard lineup, all the
like
guards.
we're just going to try to shoot with them. It's like, why not try to be the defensive team that Kentucky's worried about? Like, why not? Maybe this is the game where you play Stevenson a lot and you play Mo Diabate, and maybe you go I mean, this kind of seems archaic, but like, maybe you go Stevenson, Diabate, and Cliff on the court. That's probably not, but like, what I'm saying? Like, maybe you just really lean into defense. I was saying that really the guy I think that you would need for this game that might be a good defender is Darion Reed. We'll see if we get him back, but I think that I really hate like the idea of just trying to match your opponent. Like, you should also maybe like take advantages of the advantages you have.
Yeah, I think that goes into what we were talking about with the kind of indecisiveness in the front court against Ole Miss. And then two, I think the start of the game played into that, because I think how bad they started, I think Oats kind of panicked a little bit, but I think you're right. There was kind of a lack. I was kind of surprised. If you wanted to just play Malik Dia immediately out of that basketball game, you throw bigger bodies like Grant Nelson and Cliff Amore on him from the jump, and we didn't really see that. I think you're right. And then, yeah, they kind of tried to get small, and then you were just like, I don't really know what's going on here in terms of your strategy. And you're right. It's not very it didn't really have any decisiveness to it. Like you said, they weren't taking advantage of their
Obviously, they weren't expecting Malik Dia to be as dominant as he was. I mean, I get,
Right.
I guess, the apprehension towards doing that if you're Oates, because I mean, you've got a bunch of 3-point shooters. They didn't really, Ole Miss didn't really shoot the ball great, but I mean, you've got Padula and Morrell and like I guess and Murray, and combined, I think they're only 6 of 14. No, 6 of 16. So I mean, that's fine, but like, like they weren't shooting lights out. But I think maybe if you were to overcommit, I'm trying to play devil's advocate to my own point, but maybe if you were to overcommit, maybe Padula's hitting a few more threes, and maybe that's what they were worried about. But
Yeah.
just overall, yeah, I don't like just trying to compensate for like, set the tone, be the problem, don't try to fix their problem. I mean, I think I would like Alabama, if they're going to beat Kentucky on the road, I think it's going to be through defense. I don't think they're going to outshoot Kentucky in its own gym, especially not this Alabama team, especially like not with some of the slumps that's going through. I mean, I guess there's a chance that Mark Sears just takes over and, is hitting moon balls, and, maybe that opens up stuff for LeBaron, and everyone kind of just, you could, I mean, Alabama has the talent to win a track meet against Kentucky, but I think the better plan of action is to make it a little bit uglier and really kind of have a rebound on this blue collar, game, and actually show your muscle. And like, I think that like getting dirty with Kentucky is probably the way that, you could win.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a good segue. We can kind of get into what Kentucky brings. I will throw this out about Aden Holloway. I am fully ready to embrace this take. Aden Holloway has been the second best player on this team since conference
I've
play
been
started. Yeah, no, I'm fully ready to embrace it after Ole Miss.
But that doesn't mean he has to start, though. I still don't think that
no,
means.
and that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. This is why we are not paid the big bucks that Nate Oats is, because that is such a hard decision to make. There's so many factors, whether it's chemistry, lineup continuity, like you said. Do you like that sort of different variety he brings as a guard? We talked about that on the last show. I wrote about it today. To me, there's a little bit of Quinterly. There's a little bit of Aaron Estrada in Aden Holloway too. That reminds me of just kind of what he brought last year.
Yeah, there's a lot of Aaron Estrada. The other thing though, and here's a thing that I think I forget who it was. Somebody on our message board pointed out. I think it was. I've heard this take that Mark Sears isn't a point guard. Thoughts?
I don't agree with that point, but.
Yeah, I don't know, but
like, I think that's overthinking a Mark Sears who
Aden Holloway a better ball handler than Mark Sears / should that get him in the lineup? But like that, I guess my thought, like, could that be a case of like you need a better ball handler, get Mark open shots, and put Aden in that role? And like that's the only thing I could see. Like if you're gonna put him in the starting lineup, that's why is like you want him to play that.
Yeah, I think the thing with Alabama's guards, and frankly, everybody is Oats is. I mean, he's always said he doesn't really care who's bringing the ball up. Like, it doesn't have to be Mark Sears every time, and Aden Holloway is certainly capable of it. I think a lot of those takes about Mark Sears is he has struggled with some turnover stuff this year. Frankly, so has everybody. And I will point out he only had one turnover against Ole Miss. If you want another silver lining, but no, I don't think I don't think Mark Sears' turnovers would necessarily change because I don't really think it would matter who's bringing the ball up the floor the majority of the time. This offense is going to run through Mark Sears. I do think he is still, I guess, if you're going to say the best pure point guard on this team, I still think that's him.
And he has gotten better at a, like.
He has. He's been a better.
I'm just bringing up a point that I saw.
No. It's a good.
Aden Holloway hasn't had as much turnovers, although he hasn't had the ball as much either. So I mean,
well,
I do like the ball in. I mean, I do think he's good with the ball in his hands. Holloway. I do get the point of maybe making him a point guard. I kind of get that, but also at the same time, you're right. It's going to run through Mark Sears. So
I don't think Aden Holloway is the right guy to set up an offense. I actually, as good as he is with the ball in his hands, he is not as creative as Mark Sears. He's only averaging about an assist and a half a game. And he doesn't need to be that guy. I think Mark Sears is more than capable of that. And I think you do have to just kind of live with some of the turnover stuff with Mark Sears a little bit. He can also do well to cut it down, but I don't think I agree. I think Mark Sears is a point guard, and I think he's a damn good one. But it is an interesting point in terms of how Oates likes to use his guard. So you talked about Kentucky, and I think I agree with your point. It's going to have to be defense. I'll just run through some stats. The Wildcats, very, very good. They're number 8 in the country under Mark Pope. Very different looking team. I sort of love this refreshed Kentucky where it's a bunch of transfers. It's a bunch of vets. It's not this, 5-star freshmen who are going to be gone in 1 year. It's Mark Pope has put his stamp on this program, but like Tony said, they're very good at scoring. They rank 3rd in the country, 88.7 points per game. Alabama is still 1st. I gave my take this week. I predicted this was, if the defense doesn't come true for Alabama, I said this will be the highest scoring game in the SEC, which would have to be 207 combined points. Kentucky has the record right now with Florida. It was 106-100 in the first game of the season, but very good offense. They also, I will point out, we talked about Alabama needing to get right on the offensive boards. Kentucky ranks 8th in the country in defensive rebounds. They get about 30 a game. They also move the ball really well. They average about 19 assists to only around 10 turnovers. 5 double-digit scorers on this team. Otega Owe, 15 points a game. Lamont Butler, a name Alabama fans will know from 2023 at San Diego State. He's 13 points a game. Jackson Robinson's around 13 points a game. Andrew Carr, one of their bigs, has 11, and Kobe Brea, another guard, also around 11. Tony, a lot of firepower on this team. Does Bryan Adams' defense make the difference for the Tide on Saturday?
Okay, this is a team too that's been held. I'm trying to look at it. Yeah, it's been held under 70 points 3 times, and they've lost all 3 games. That's why I'm with more emphasis on you've got to make it ugly. I mean, like you look at their 3 losses: 70-66 at Clemson, 85-65 against Ohio State, and 82-69 at Georgia. So, I mean, 2 of those are on the road. It's going to be harder to win at Rupp. It's going to be harder to limit this offense at Rupp. But yeah, I think that it's going to have to come down to that defense. I mean, I think, but it's not unheard of, right? I mean, they've been held under 70 points 3 times. Alabama's got a good defense. I think that, it is not mission impossible. I mean, this is not the Fab Five. It's a good team, but it's not the Golden State Warriors either. So, I think that, I don't think Alabama is going to hold them under 70, but I do think that, the defense is going to be there. And I think that, you can have an opportunity to win if you come out and play that blue collar style. And I think eventually, it will lead to offense. I think you could probably, it's one of those games where I don't think Kentucky plays great defense. So, I mean, if you get a few stops, you can go on those runs that you've seen Alabama do. And, you get up a 10-0 run, take the crowd out of the game a little bit. I think that's too where you have to look at If Alabama is fortunate enough to put itself in that position, let's say, it gets a few stops, and kind of creates a 10-hour run, can it keep its foot on the gas, or will it go back to it comes full circle to that effort thing, or do they let Kentucky back into the game? Because I think momentum is going to be a big thing in Rupp as well, especially against a team like Kentucky that can score. So, if you do get a chance to kind of stun Kentucky, you got to keep it going, because if they get hot, I mean, it is a tough team, and I think in that building, the SEC, I mean, they're also, you know, they're coming off a game against an A&M team that plays pretty rough. So they're going to be ready for that too. So you're going to have to really bring your game. Yeah, I think it's possible, but like I said, it's going to have to be a totally different effort.
I love that you brought up the streakiness and going on runs, because I think that is something you're going to need to do in this game. If you can string together the multiple stops against this Kentucky offense, you can certainly find those runs on defense. Tony, one of my favorite stats in college basketball, a guy named Evan Maya does it. You've probably seen his stuff before. He does the kill shot tracking.
I saw you retweet that. I have to
Yes.
go look at it again, but yeah.
So the kill shot, for those who don't know, it's a stat that tracks runs of 10-0 or more. So, that's considered a kill shot run. Alabama is a notoriously good, streaky team. This year, Tony, they rank kind of in the bubble of, he labeled it least streaky. Games are kind of boring. They either win or lose on, they're not decided on runs, which I don't think is super common for Nate Oats Alabama teams. And I think you are going to have to kind of embrace that streakiness in a game like this, where if you can string together 2-3 possessions where you get a stop every time, you're going to be able to score on this Kentucky defense. And one or two of those kill shot runs, might get you a road win here. I do think that is the recipe. And then I think the big thing
How does that stat work? Like, is there a counter argument towards like not being streaky, being consistent, or is it only factoring like good streaks?
No, there's definitely an argument to not being streaky. You can be solid and still win a lot of games. The best teams are able to go on runs and then sustain the defense.
Okay.
They're essentially, I guess they're labeled as strong teams. They're able to go on runs and they match it with good defense. Streaky teams give up a lot of big runs, go on a lot of big runs. I feel like that's where we saw Alabama last year. And Alabama's kind of in that middle. They don't go on a lot of runs, but they also don't usually give up a lot of big runs.
Yeah.
So there is a formula to winning that way long term, but I do think against Kentucky, they're going to have to go on a couple. I think you kind of need that from a game like this. And then to me, the other big thing, there has to be another emphasis on the offensive glass. They are facing more traditional bigs. Tony, more bigs you like to watch. Andrew Carr, 6'11", and then they have Amari Williams, who's averaging around 9 points and 9 boards a game. He's from England originally, 7-foot center. Comes on.
London.
Yes, he starts for them at center. So maybe that means Alabama will have more success. They're not facing that kind of in between sort of 6'8" skilled forward guys. These are kind of more back to the basket traditional bigs that they're going to have to.
Amari Williams from Nottingham, England. I wonder if he's a Nottingham Forest fan. Big up to Forest.
Big season this year on the footy front. But yeah, so I think you're going to have to. They have size. They obviously have really good guard play. They have all sorts of guys who can hurt you. But yeah, I think if you can put a kill shot or two together, it probably wins you this game, because I think you can score points. Then it just comes down to how many stops can you get. But it's going to be a tough one. I build Alabama to lose this one in my predictions, but I also had them losing to A&M on the road. So I was wrong about that. Alabama's, I think, overall looked pretty good away from home outside of that Purdue game too.
How concerned are you about Alabama if they do lose this game?
I wrote about that. I think there is a world where you lose this game and you can still absolutely feel good heading into what should be 2 home wins against LSU and Vanderbilt. I think if you, because of that effort stuff, I think if you show that, if they win the blue collar battle, if they come out and start the game better, don't commit a million turnovers right off the bat, I do think there's a world where you can lose this game by 7 or 8 points on the road at Rupp Arena to a top 10 team and still feel really good about how you played. I know that's obviously probably not what fans want to hear, but I think it would depend how they lose, but I think there's a world where I still feel okay in terms of Alabama's response. I am intrigued to see how the team responds to Nate Oats' message after Ole Miss.
Yeah, it's tough. I think it makes that it obviously makes that Vanderbilt game a must win because you don't want to lose 3 in a row, especially not
Definitely.
2 at home. And when I was listing teams that like here's teams that like you don't bring your A game,
Vanderbilt's
Vanderbilt's
another
another
one.
one of those teams that like you just wouldn't put
Yep.
as like a team that you're scared of. But then you look at them and like Vanderbilt, could theoretically beat Alabama at home if they come out against Ole Miss. I do think Ole Miss is better than Vanderbilt, but still another team like that, it's concerning. On the flip side, though, I think if you win this game, it sounds weird. You obviously want to win at home, but if I told you that Alabama is going to go 1-1 this week, I think you prefer the win against Kentucky than the win against
Sure.
Ole Miss. It's just a better win, right?
Yeah. No, certainly resume wise, it is. It's on the road against
And then
the quad
it's
one.
so weird the way that the narrative changes with this game, right?
Mhm.
You either lose 2 games in a row and like the sky's falling, and then I'm sure it's only a matter of time before Auburn fans get a hold of my column at that point. Or you win and you have back-to-back road wins at top 10 teams. It's just such a momentum swing game for Alabama. And I think another thing too, if you win, right? Let's say you win, you get that momentum of that you beat, Vanderbilt and LSU are 2 winnable games, and all of a sudden you have 3 games in a row. Then you're heading to Starkville. You could really start building up I think if they win against Kentucky and like maybe if this Ole Miss game is a wake up call, right? I think you could have a run of games where even though there's three more road games in that stretch, I think you could maybe go undefeated until you play Auburn on the 15th of February. That's the kind of run you could have if if you get started. I think this is a good spark game.
We're at a pivotal moment.
Right. Yeah. I think it's but then again, here's another thing too. Like if you screw around, lose this game, I think if you lose this game, you're not going to lose against Vanderbilt. Let's say, you lose this game, you bounce back with 2 wins against Vanderbilt and LSU, and then you lose against Mississippi State, you split one of the losses against at Arkansas and at Texas, and all of a sudden, right, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You already have 4 losses in the SEC heading into this insane stretch run where you play Auburn twice at the road against Missouri, home against Kentucky, home against Mississippi State, at Tennessee, home against Florida. Like if you already have 4 losses heading into that, that's kind of rough, right? So
Yeah.
You kind of almost have to pad and go on a run at this point in the season just because it is so tough. Alabama ends the season with just an absolute gauntlet that like you don't want to mess around, and any win, that's what makes this Ole Miss game such a stinger, is it's like you kind of needed that to pad your SEC lead. And so if you can get that back with a win at Kentucky, I think that you almost want to, if you still want to have the SEC title, you almost want to maybe have a game or 2 in hand when you enter that gauntlet run, because you're going to lose a few of those games.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We're at a kind of pivotal moment. The loss of the Ole Miss game has created a lot of pressure on this matchup against Kentucky, but Alabama, Nate Oats sent a message, like I said, and Alabama has a chance to respond to that message with what would be a very, very big win. So coming up, it's on Saturday, 11 a.m. tip-off.
You're going to
time
be
at Rupp
there.
Arena. I will be there. My first trip to Rupp Arena. I'm very excited to watch.
You got to drink some good bourbon. I know you're not a bourbon guy, but I feel like you gotta change that, man.
I'll have to make it happen. Definitely
You're in
Kentucky.
huge bourbon country here.
Yeah, absolutely. But 11 a.m. tip, ESPN on Saturday from Rupp Arena. Huge one for the Alabama Crimson Tide against the Kentucky Wildcats.
We got predictions before we leave.
Sure. You want to throw in a score, or what do you want to predict?
I want you to go first.
Okay, well, I'm going to live up. I'm going to kind of counter what we talked about, because I do think defense is going to have to win this game. And you know what? I will make it win this game. I'm gonna go an overtime game. We're gonna have free basketball in Rupp. To make my prediction in my column come true, there will be more than 206 points scored in this game. I'm going to go Alabama in overtime, 109 to 103.
I don't think they're winning if it goes over 100.
They might not. You might not beat Kentucky in a track meet, but I have to live up. I have to match my column prediction. So that's what I'm going to roll with.
I am going Alabama 85, Kentucky 79.
That would be a defensive statement for sure.
Yeah,
for sure against a Kentucky team.
But I mean, that's how you beat Kentucky. I mean, you look at it. I mean, you hold them under. You know, I mean, you can hold them under.
You can. You have to play good defense.
Yeah.
You have to play good defense. So, I'm not super strong on my prediction. If anything, I'm probably stronger on yours. But you know what? We will see what happens. It's going to be a fun one, I think, in Rupp Arena. Top 10 game, Alabama, Kentucky, 11 a.m. ESPN from Rupp Arena. Subscribe on Tide Illustrated for all the coverage of that. Have some good off-season stuff for football and recruiting coming up as well. Subscribe here on the YouTube if you're watching. Drop us a like. Drop us a comment. Follow us on Spotify if you're listening. We will see you next time.